Yes, good afternoon, Commissioner Lucki and Deputy Commissioner Duheme. My name is Eva Krajewska, and I'm counsel for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. I'd like to start off first with respect to the consultation that the Chief of Staff of the Public Safety Minister Mendocino did with you, Commissioner, with respect to your requests for under the Emergencies Act. And this is document pb.nsc.can.403256. It was up earlier where he emailed you and asked you what the RCMP may request, and you provided a list. And I just, the document is up for your reference, but I just want to confirm that many of the requests that you made were restrictions on the right to public assembly, correct? That was kind of the main, those are the main suggestions that you were asking for Cabinet to consider.
I think some of it also had to do with tow trucks and making sure that there were no children in the area. And
that's correct. You're right. You also asked for tow trucks, and you also asked for cell phone disruption. And my understanding is that other than the cell phone disruption question, all the others were put into place under the emergencies orders. Would that be fair?
I think so. Not maybe in the exact way we said it, but yes.
And you understood that when you were making these suggestions or providing this advice, that the declaration of a state of emergency does not suspend the operation of the charter, correct?
Yes, correct.
And you understood that to the extent that any of these suggestions would limit any charter rights, those limits had to be carefully tailored and not disproportionate to the objective of the measures.
I would say yes. Those are complicated.
And Commissioner Lucki, you did not provide, or the RCMP did not provide any suggestions with respect to the economic measures that were enacted.
No, we may have been consulted. Our financial people may have been consulted on process-wise, but not. I refer to Deputy Commissioner.
I think we might have been part of the consultation process. I'm not 100% certain.
So you may have been also consulted with respect to the economic measures that were enacted as well.
I believe we were, but I'm not 100% sure.
And if I take you to the economic measures that were enacted and their implementation, I understand that Mr. Denis Beaudoin was kind of the person at the RCMP that took the lead on that issue. That's correct. And we have his notes at pb.nsc.can.408065. Mr. Registrar, I'm sorry, if I could ask you to put that up on the screen and I can repeat it if necessary. His notes, and I'm going to just go a little bit back in time and go to a note on page 3 of this document. This are Mr. Beaudoin's notes. And this is notes from a call on page 3. This is before the declaration of the emergency, February 9th, 2022. Call with finance. First bullet, they want to enact law to be able to seize money from protesters, looking at privacy law. Second bullet, we explained that right now monitoring FAI, NS, MC, POS is looking at specific on the ground offenses. They ask if law was made to be able to share info of the banks. I explained that FI need an order to execute seizing assets, told me RCMP should not be the only law enforcement body with new legislative power. Are you familiar with Mr. Beaudoin's consultations with the Ministry of Finance?
Not exactly all the intricacies of his meetings. As I said earlier, I believe they're involved in the consultation process early on. This demonstrates that they are, but I'm not aware of all the meetings they had. I would have been briefed. I would have been briefed every second day of some of the progress that's going on.
But you agree with Mr. Beaudoin's advice to finance at the time that the types of powers that finance was requesting required court orders or court orders for them to exercise those types of powers as at February 9th, 2022.
The way I'm reading it is currently we need to execute judicial orders to seize any fundings. Currently, the way it stands, before the invocation of the act.
But the,
Correct.
But the act wasn't seizing, right?
No.
The act was freezing.
Oh.
I don't know if that
Right.
changes anything.
Well, I think that's a legal question.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not sure.
But at this time, to seize, or I think even if, I would suggest even to freeze assets, the RCMP or the bank would need a court order to do that.
I don't know. I know for sure seizing, but I'm not sure about freezing.
Okay. And once the economic measures were implemented after the declaration of the emergency, you'd agree that the RCMP became the central focal point for financial institutions and as a conduit of information to financial institutions with respect to information about designated persons.
Correct. We were the conduit of information from the OPS and OPP to the financial services.
And it was Mr. Denis Baudouin and Kelly Hughes at the RCMP who were the primary contact persons with financial institutions to provide them with information.
I think it was Kelly Bradshaw.
Correct. Denis Baudouin was the primary. I'm not aware of Kelly Hughes's, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay. And the RCMP, as you said, Deputy Commissioner, the RCMP would collect information, including names, license plate numbers, and other information from both OPS and OPP and provide that information to financial institutions.
Correct. There's two processes here. The RCMP would obtain information from OPS and OPP on relevant criminal investigation that they have and would submit those names to the financial services. And the other one is that the OPS and OPP provided some license plate numbers, some names of company that our team had to validate, and validation process was no different than investigation. Go through the data banks so we can ascertain that that vehicle that belongs to whoever is still there and the person is still there, and then the information would be sent to the financial services. Another step to confirm the identity of the individual is when we were able to call the individuals to let them know that we do have a license plate, we know they're here, and that the information is going to be passed on to financial services. We did that when we could. Some people responded that they didn't want to leave. The names went forward. Some people responded that they couldn't leave, in which the names did not go forward to the financial services.
And have you reviewed the Canadian Banking Association's witness statement ahead of this hearing?
No, I haven't.
Okay. The Canadian Banking witness statement provides that it was the RCMP who clarified that the entities contained on the lists were designated persons under the emergency measures order. Do you have any reason to disagree with that?
So we have the responsibility to identify the individuals and transfer the information to the financial services. Financial services, it was up to them to decide if they would freeze any assets or in their holdings.
And the financial institutions also had an obligation to report back to the RCMP what financial instruments they froze, correct?
I'm not quite sure. They did, but I'm not quite sure if it's written in the orders.
Okay, well, you can take it from me. It's written in the order that they either have to report to the RCMP or CSIS, but it ended up being that they reported to the RCMP.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. You are right in the sense that anything they had in their holdings, they would inform the commissioner of the RCMP. That's in the act.
And if I'll take you to an example of a reporting letter from the Toronto Dominion Bank. This is pb.nsc.can 408748. And this reporting letter is to CPL, I guess is that Corporal or Captain Hughes, dated February 18th, 2022. Sorry, we're just waiting for it to come up on the screen. Mr. Registrar, do you need me to, oh, no, we got it. Okay, so this is.
That would be Corporal.
Corporal, thank you very much. And if we scroll down, they're reporting pursuant to the order, and they list by name and the type of accounts they froze. And if we go to the if you just look at the types of accounts, they would freeze both checking accounts, savings accounts. If you go to the second page, joint accounts, business accounts, RSP accounts, and HELOC accounts of any person who was found to be a designated person. And so I want to ask you, are you aware that financial institutions asked the RCMP whether they could, financial institutions expressed concern to the RCMP about the breadth of the orders. Were you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of it, and we do not write the order, and the responsibility of freezing any assets is the responsibility of the bank. We don't tell them what to freeze or how to go about it.
And, okay, well, you understood that Mr. Beaudoin and Ms. Hughes held multiple calls with representatives from financial institutions to explain to them how the orders would operate and to answer any questions they may have?
Yes, because the order, when the order came into effect, there's no procedure or policy or ways of doing things. So it was left up to the RCMP working with the financial services to try and figure out, and that's why with the documents that were disclosed, there is an annex there as to the form that we would use to submit to the banks.
Right, and based on the calls and the notes of those calls that have been produced in these proceedings, the financial institutions questioned whether the freezing should apply to joint accounts. They asked whether there should be a threshold to act, i.e. whether, if someone had a de minimis amount in their account. They asked whether this applied to donations. And I think, were you aware that they asked about the question of whether it applied to donations, and the RCMP said that they should not be pursuing donations?
Not aware of the conversations of the exchanges, but I would imagine that the financial services would reach out to their legal team to determine what's in scope, what's not in scope, just as we would do if we're not certain with a certain element of the order. We would be reaching out to our legal team to seek clarification.
And you're aware that the order arguably also applied to credit unions and insurance companies?
It did so in insurance companies as well, correct?
And that the RCMP exercised its discretion not to provide information to insurance companies?
It did, and we have to be mindful that our folks, the team, had less than 24 hours to put everything together. And when you look at the timeline for the convoy, the very first packages that were provided to financial services was, I think, on the 17th, and on the 21st, we informed the financial services that there's nobody left. So it was only on a stretched out on 4 days, very little time to get organized and to get a proper process in place. So both financial institutions and the RCMP did the best they came up with something that was suitable for both.
Okay. And the primary purpose of these financial measures was used to disrupt and as a method to disrupt and persuade people to leave Ottawa. Is that how the RCMP used these measures?
That's correct. Disrupt and whatnot. It was such a short time frame. It was primarily used to deter the people and disrupt.
Okay. And pivoting now, Deputy Commissioner Duheme, if I can take you back to the notes, your personal notes from the Freedom Convoy. This is pb.nsc.can 408073. If we can go to page 58 of this document. This is a note from February 12th. So this is before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. If you scroll down, there's a note at 10:19 a.m. There's a note. Deputy Commissioner, sorry, if you could just read it out so that I don't mistake your handwriting.
There was enormous frustration, and I mistake mistake my own handwriting, but there's an enormous frustration with law enforcement. Whatever promises were not fulfilled, and then not quite sure protests move around. I'm not quite sure what I meant by that.
All right, and then, sorry, the next bullet, separate.
State and police, although the lines were crossed several times.
Are you able to provide any context with respect to this note? Who was communicating to you first, let's start with who is communicating to you that there is enormous frustration with law enforcement, or is this your own observation?
No, this was, these were notes taken from a meeting, and when I said separate state and police, although the lines were crossed several times, what I meant by that was not by elected official, but more having representatives from public safety portfolio, not at the elected level. People from PCO reached in directly to the chief of police saying what we could do. And I just didn't think that, I think it was a law enforcement matter, and anything to do with briefing public safety or or PCO would be up to the commissioner, and keep the departments out of it.
And so you say PCO, you mean the Privy Council office reached out to Commissioner Lucki or to Chief Slowly?
It was one meeting that they reached out to. I attended, the commissioner attended, and it was with Mr. Slowly as well as other people on the phone. I just thought it blurred the communication lines, and what you'd see is you saw the mayor get a letter directly to the Minister of Medencino, and the question of resources or assistance should be dealt with at the policing level, and then we bring it up to our respective governments if needed.
So you were you were noting concern in your notes that certain members of the federal public service may have been crossing the line between church and state, or state and police with respect to these issues.
I don't say I use that term, but it would be more relevant if it was an elected official, which wasn't the case. I just thought that not to blur the lines of communication, it would have been best if the commissioner, and this is my opinion, that the commissioner was a point of contact for any federal government department to brief. Okay.
Thank you. And my last question is to Commissioner Lucki. Commissioner, you mentioned in your examination in chief by Commission Counsel, you were taken to the February 13th IRG meeting, and I understand from the minutes of that meeting that you attended the February 13th IRG meeting, correct?
Yes.
And you had speaking notes for that meeting that included a statement that in your view, or the RCMP's view, all available tools and legislation had not been exhausted, including charges that could have been laid under the criminal code, correct?
Yes.
And the IRG group is a group of select ministers brought together by the Prime Minister to help with the coordination of an incident that is occurring, whatever it may be, correct?
Yes, the ministers that are relative to the incident, I would say.
With relevant expertise to the issue, correct?
Relevant, yes.
And Commissioner, would you, the IRG has met for other incidents prior to these events, correct?
Yes.
And would you have felt free to speak up at that? Do you feel like you would be able to raise issues at those types of meetings, or is it the type of meeting where you feel that you could only be called upon to speak?
No, if I needed to speak, I could raise my hand, or I could just simply walk over and talk to, usually I was sitting next to the minister, so I could raise it through the minister.
And that's the Minister of Public Safety,
Yes.
Minister Mendocino.
Yes.
And so do you feel like it was important at that meeting on February 13th to inform those ministers of the fact that, in your view, existing legislation had not been exhausted?
It was already brought through to Minister Mendocino through his chief of staff. And it was in my speaking notes, obviously, which I don't believe now that I was able to speak to, but it was already brought forward. So,
but do you feel like it would have carried weight?
You're well over time, so you're going to have to wrap up.
This is, Commissioner, I really appreciate the indulgence you provided with me, and this is my last question. Commissioner Lucki, do you not feel like it would have carried weight for the ministers who are considering their response, including potentially considering invoking the Emergencies Act, to hear it directly from you?
It may have, but it was only part, even when I gave it to the chief of staff, it was only one portion of information amongst many information that they were dealing with in the invocation of the Emergency Act. And when I brought it forward the first time, it was mostly for them to have all of the information when they made their decision. And having already given it to the minister, I felt that even though I didn't get the opportunity at that meeting, it was already passed on.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lucki and Deputy Commissioner Duheme, and thank you, Commissioner Rouleau, for the indulgence.